Just a brief background with the Cultural Facilities Fund. Thanks to many of you on the call, advocacy efforts over the years, this program has been up and running since 2007. And since then, we've made over 1,300 capital and planning grants to the cultural sector for all sorts of projects, most of them being infrastructure, structural, mechanical, electrical, life safety, also new construction. But the grants, as many of you know, go up to about $200,000 each on the capital grants. And with the planning grants, they cap at about $35,000 each. Now, with these grants, you can use them to assess and implement weatherization projects, energy efficiency projects, heat pumps, renewable systems. So the fund is very flexible in that way. So think some of the things that you hear today and some of the resources and the technologies that are going to be featured, just remember that the Cultural Facilities Fund can help pay for the implementation, the planning and implementation of some of these systems. We do have a grant application that's live right now. That grant application will be due on February 2nd. And given the environment we're in, where the Commonwealth is moving toward a net zero emissions environment by 2050, and the benchmarks that are in place in some municipalities and coming to others pretty soon, I think now is the time to plan for and implement projects that get us to a carbon-reduced future. We hosted a webinar about a month ago with New Ecology on paths to decarbonization, where some of the technologies were presented as options for you to consider. We'll put that webinar link in the chat. You can refer to that. But this webinar today, so to help us better understand this unified work between the gas and electric utilities for energy efficiency efforts, collectively known as Mass Save, we're fortunate enough to have representation from the utility companies here today to share their expertise in delivering these Mass Save products, keeping in mind that today's audience is stewards of cultural facilities. We hope to, after the presentation, to engage in a robust question and answer section. So please feel free to type questions in the chat, and Miranda kind of organize that effort. And I certainly will leave it up to the presenters today to field questions in real time, or have us, read the chat and engage that way. But the idea is that you get some of your questions answered today in real time. So right now, I'd like to introduce Grayson Bryant from National Grid, and Grayson's going to kick off the presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen, and hopefully I will share the correct one. Okay, if everything is working properly, you should be able to see a green screen that says Mass Save Energy Efficiency Program Overview.
Yes, Grayson.
I see a head nodding. Fantastic. Yep. Okay, good. Great. Well, yeah, as Jay mentioned, my name is Grayson Bryant. I work for National Grid, but am here with a number of my colleagues from some of the other program administrators in Massachusetts to present on what are collectively known as the Mass Save Energy Efficiency programs and program offerings. One just brief point of clarification is while there are numerous program administrators in the Commonwealth, there are 6 of them. 5 of them are in fact utilities. One, Cape Light Compact, is a joint powers entity that delivers energy efficiency programs for the Cape and Martha's Vineyard. So let me just get right into it. We'll be sort of passing the baton around a little bit amongst us, but along with myself, we have Ryan Willingham from Eversource, Brianna Kane from Cape Light Compact, and Amit Kulkarni, also from Eversource, presenting today. But our presentation is statewide and on behalf of all the program administrators. Let's see. Okay, so just a quick overview. This is what we have, about 30 or so slides to go through. We will be getting into some detail, but generally we wanted to keep this fairly high level because we understood from Jay that there were likely to be a number of questions about kind of what we offer, how we do it, and so we have left a considerable amount of time for Q&A. We can address as many of your questions, hopefully, as we have time for. So we'll just be sort of providing a quick overview of who we are, what we offer, how to work with us, and then we can get into more detailed Q&A after that. So as I mentioned earlier, very, very broadly, we are a collection of energy efficiency service providers, mostly utilities, in addition to Cape Light Compact, that offer these programs that are authorized by legislation and approved by the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. And collectively, these offerings are known as Mass Save. They're delivered by the individual PAs that you are served by, but we, as much as possible, we endeavor to provide sort of a common experience. So whether you are served by Cape Light down on the Cape, or Eversource and National Grid in Boston, or say Berkshire Utilities or Berkshire Gas out in the Berkshires, we endeavor to provide sort of the same program and the same experience regardless. So we have sort of 6 major pillars of our offerings. Some of these sort of have new emphasis in the most recent 3-year plan, specifically the 2 on the left, electrification and equity, have sort of received kind of new or invigorated focus in the most recent 3-year efficiency plan, especially the emphasis on electrification, sort of that the recent Climate Act requires. We also offer a number of traditional sort of energy efficiency measures, lighting, HVAC equipment, motors and drives, things that we'll get into a little bit more in some of the coming slides. We also have a greater emphasis on workforce development and inclusion, continued focus on serving small businesses, and sort of in keeping with the greenhouse gas reduction goals envisioned by the new climate legislation, we have an increased emphasis on weatherization services. So hopefully that provides a decent overview. In terms of some of the recent policy drivers, as I mentioned last year, I think in April, Governor Baker signed new climate legislation that required the programs to increase their emphasis on greenhouse gas emissions and not just energy reduction, with an eye towards environmental protection and focused on environmental justice. Obviously, the purpose of this is to combat climate change, and is part of a broader strategy of reaching a net zero by 2050 goal. So in terms of what we offer, we offer a number of pathways to incentivize the purchase of energy efficient products and services. This runs a gamut of different ways that buildings, businesses, and homes use energy, but specifically for commercial industrial facilities, which is largely what we're talking about today. This focus is on HVAC equipment, boilers, furnaces, water heaters, heat pumps, which emphasizes the focus on electrification, chillers and air conditioners, and then the control systems that tie all of those pieces of equipment together. Emphasis on variable frequency drives, which are particularly common in larger commercial facilities. Lighting systems and controls are something that we've done a great deal of over the last probably 2 decades. And then smaller in terms of overall contribution to the portfolio, but no less important, kitchen equipment, building and systems retro commissioning, and process equipment, which is especially common in manufacturing and industrial sites. We've included a link to where you can find more information on the details of these particular rebates and incentives. We will go into some of these details on the webinar today, but masssave.com is a resource for anyone in the Commonwealth to learn more about the various incentives and pieces of equipment that the program administrators incentivize and how to engage. So while this particular link is for rebates and incentives, masssave.com is a good place to check for if you have questions after this presentation. So I'm going to go into program offerings, and I believe I will be handing it off to my colleague Ryan Willingham, who is going to talk a little bit more about electrification and weatherization.
Thank you, Grayson, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, as Grayson mentioned, my name is Ryan Willingham. I work for Eversource and am as a sponsor of MassSave. We'll be talking about our electrification offerings. So first, when we talk about electrification, I just want to define what we mean. That's displacing any fossil fuel usage to be now meeting that demand with electricity. So it's conversion from oil, propane, or natural gas to electric use. This aligns with the shift to clean our grid. So we want to, there's efforts being undertaken to make sure that the power that we're producing is being produced in a more clean manner. And those two actions in conjunction with each other lead to a path to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that the Commonwealth wants to see in order to meet our goals. Now, we realize in order to meet the Commonwealth's goals that electrification of our built environment is not the only way to get there, but it is a significant step towards achieving those goals. We can go to the next slide. So not only is it electrifying the built environment, but there's a big emphasis on commercial heating systems, and that's what we'll be talking about today. A large percentage of the energy used in buildings or commercial buildings today is on space heating. So we will be focusing on space heating, and that's what a lot of our offers are focused on, although we do offer electrification in other manners as well. But in order to do that, we've expanded our equipment eligibility this year. This is all new with the 3-year plan that was launched at the beginning of the year. We've greatly increased our incentives to support electrification. And we've also have managed to get greater engagement across the entire heat pump supply chain. So that means we've been working with manufacturers, we've been working with their reps on the ground, as well as designers and customers to ensure that we can meet these electrification targets. Go to the next slide. So now I'll talk about our streamlined heat pump pathway, which is a prescriptive offer. So these incentives are new for 2022 and beyond. We're offering incentives for air source heat pumps. This is air-to-air equipment. This includes single and multi-head split systems, as well as packaged or central and rooftop units. And for these systems, we are offering an incentive of $2,500 per ton. We also offer an incentive for air source VRF equipment, and this includes systems that are larger than 5.4 tons, and it meets the AHRI standard listed there. And we're offering a $3,500 per ton incentive for that. And then for ground source heat pumps, we are offering a $4,500 a ton incentive, and this includes both closed and open loop systems. So that's if you drill a well and just have some fluid going into the earth and back out of the earth to heat your building, that's the closed loop system, or if you're pulling from a reservoir such as a lake or a pond or something. Just some caveats on the on that prescriptive offer. So think I lost the slide. There we go. So caveats on the prescriptive offer. We offer, it's all about fuel displacement. So again, it's all about taking heating that was done by, that did use oil or propane or natural gas, and now using electricity or with clean heat pumps to meet those heating needs. We realize that a lot of commercial spaces may not be able to fully electrify, so we do offer incentives for both partial and full electrification. If there is partial electrification, we do require that there's integrated controls or an EMS sequence to make sure that the heat pump and the backup system or supplemental heating system work in conjunction to ensure that we are seeing that fossil fuel displacement. Just note there, we recommend a switch over temperature of 30 degrees or below, just to make sure that we do realize those savings. And those incentives that I listed are fuel blind. So it doesn't matter if you're replacing, displacing natural gas, oil, or propane, or even electric resistance, you still be eligible for those incentives. But one thing to note is that this incentive offer is meant for smaller projects in existing buildings. So new construction is not eligible for this pathway. There's a different pathway in which we serve that market. And for projects that are greater than 150 tons are also not eligible for this pathway. There's a link there. I think these slides will be shared, but there's a link there to get more information on this heat pump offer. And this slide is just, it's a lot of numbers to throw at you, but it has our efficiency requirements. So for different equipment capacities and equipment types, there's different efficiency ratings. So there's different EER and SEER and IER ratings. Those are on the cooling side. And then on the heating side, there's HSPF and COPs that the equipment must minimally perform at in order to be eligible for an incentive. You don't need to memorize this table. We do provide a QPL. There's a link at the top of this slide to our QPL. So we try to make it as easy as possible for participants. If you go to that QPL, you'll find a list of many different pieces of equipment that qualify. But in general, if a piece of equipment that you're looking at installing meets these requirements, it will qualify for the prescriptive offer as long as the total project is less than 150 tons. Go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the custom pathway. So everything I just spoke about before was prescriptive. It's simple as we could make it. Depending on the size of the equipment, you know what your incentive is going to be. We realize there are many buildings that won't fall neatly into that prescriptive path, and some of those buildings include, again, new construction. So any new buildings or additions, major renovations may not fall into that pathway. Really large systems, so anything over that 150 ton threshold, or systems that are using complex internal distribution layouts. So a lot of hydronic systems that wouldn't have any of the equipment that was mentioned there, the air-to-air equipment that was mentioned on the prescriptive pathway. Those would all have to go under a custom pathway, and under our custom pathway, you would work with the sponsor of MassSave to determine what the savings are, what the costs are, and then we would come up with a tailored incentive offer to help you implement that project. Go to the next slide. And I'll talk a bit about weatherization. So weatherization in the C&I space, and we can go to the next slide, is something that we really are ramping up in this 3-year plan. So in order to support this effort, we recently introduced a prescriptive offer, and this is for smaller buildings, less than 8,000 square feet. We didn't want folks to get wrapped up in the mundane and arduous pathway of the custom pathway, because that has a lot of different asks of it. So we have this prescriptive offer that makes it pretty simple for attic insulation, wall insulation, and air sealing. If it's less than 8,000 square feet, there's a prescriptive offer that you are eligible for. For slightly larger buildings, so from 8,000 to 100,000 square feet, we also have a custom express. So you would fill out a custom application, but there are, for insulation, air sealing, and weather stripping, there are prescriptive-like savings methodology. So really, we just need to know what you're doing. The incentive is still somewhat custom, but at least you don't have to do engineering calculations to determine what the savings are so that we can give you an offer. And then for larger buildings, well, then we have to do a more custom analysis. So you go through the full custom process. One thing to note about commercial about weatherization is that it's important to weatherize in conjunction with electrification, because there are a lot of barriers to electrification, but one thing that can help is that you want to properly weatherize your building to ensure that you're minimizing the heating and cooling load so that you can minimize the size of the heat pump that needs to go into the building, and to ensure that you can meet the comfort needs of the building. So it's very important to weatherize and make sure that you have a properly weatherized building as you attempt to do any electrification. We also have increased our incentives for weatherization projects. So if you tried to participate in the past with us on weatherization, just know that we are even more committed today towards getting these weatherization projects off the ground. So with that, I think I will be passing it on to Brianna to speak about some small business offerings.
Thank you, Brian. Brianna Kane with Cape Light Compact, one of the sponsors of Mass Save, here to talk to you about the small business pathway offerings. So many people might have participated in a home energy assessment for residential customers. And so you can kind of view this program for our small business customers as kind of a similar approach to pursue energy efficiency for your buildings. So one of the eligibility requirements for a small business customer to participate in the Turnkey Pathway program is that their annual usage needs to be less than 1.5 million kilowatt hours or 40,000 therms of natural gas. So if you think about like your residential property, a house, you might have some small businesses or historic properties that are now maybe museums that might be a few thousand square feet, but your actual annual electric usage is definitely coming in at under, 1.5 million kWh or that 40,000 therms. So trying to give you a picture that a number of sites might qualify for the small business offering. During the offering and what's available to customers that fall into that category is the ability to look at lighting and lighting controls, so sensors, ways that we can help further reduce energy usage in your property, thermostats and water saving devices for faucets, refrigeration if you have a site that has a kitchen or something along those lines. There is also other control offerings. And again, we do have incentives available for this customer class that you can use for heating and cooling equipment upgrades. And again, weatherization is also a focus of this pathway. On the next slide, we kind of go through the very easy process as we hope it lays out for everyone to see. A couple ways to come into the program, but the easiest way is to visit our Mass Save website and to find out who your program sponsor is. There is a web link below, so you'll be able to follow that link to find out who is the program sponsor for your territory. Basically, then you would contact that program sponsor. It serves up a phone number or an email for you to fill in your request, and then it would come to the sponsor and we move that along to get you scheduled for an energy assessment. All the sponsors have turnkey vendors that provide these services for us. You would eventually, after the walkthrough of your site, discussion with you about program offerings, you would receive a report that outlines those energy saving opportunities, and then you can choose which measures are installed by the turnkey vendor. So this is just kind of a nice little example of how we are trying to streamline the process and hope that it becomes an easy way for customers to follow through and kind of receive a comprehensive scope of services for work that they could implement at their site. We also do know that some customers have their own contractors that they currently use. And so we do have some additional options that we wanted to share with you today on how to move energy efficiency forward if you have a contractor that you want to use, or again, a reminder that maybe you've already had an energy assessment or your building has been renovated and now you just have a specific item, applications that are available, and then again, instant incentives. So these three options here allow you to kind of choose which pathway you want to pursue. We do strongly encourage our small business customers to really start and focus with the turnkey offering. Yet we do understand and we want to make sure that we're advancing energy efficiency for you effectively. So these are a few other options. One is you're working with your own contractor, and they can submit an application of equipment that you might be looking to install to the program sponsor, which would then get a pre-approval or pre-installment verification. Then the work would be performed and follow-up would happen. So that's one of the ways. Another way is just these straight incentive applications that have been kind of touched on a little earlier. And these are per unit incentives for lighting, refrigeration, custom projects, etc. And then we do have these instant incentives that are available at a point of purchase. Oftentimes your contractor, when they are making that, HVAC equipment purchase, it is an instant reduction at the time of sale. So that should be passed on to you. So just a few other ways to make sure that you have every opportunity to pursue energy efficiency at your sites. We now are going to talk about a few other initiatives, and I believe I am turning it back to Ryan.
I think I'm covering these.
Sorry, Grayson.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Sure. Okay, so I will just touch on a couple of these. So active demand reduction is a program that the PAs offer. We often refer to it externally as Connected Solutions. This is essentially a demand response program that we provide in the Commonwealth. It's offered by the electric program administrators. And there are, for commercial and industrial customers, sort of two main modes of participation. One is targeted dispatch, one is daily dispatch. Each of these, we are calling events in which we ask that customers reduce their energy consumption during 2 to 3 hour windows, usually in the summer, always in the afternoon, always in the summer, usually during periods of peak electric system demand. So think very hot, humid August afternoons when it's been 97 degrees for 3 days in a row. In those instances, there's extra strain on the electric grid, and we are essentially asking folks to curtail energy consumption during those times. We have a couple different pathways for participation based on how many events we call. There's a targeted offering which calls 1 to 8 events per summer. There's another one which we call 30 to 60 events per summer. We pay $35 per kilowatt hour of average seasonal reduction for targeted dispatch, and 200 kW per average kW of summer reduction for daily dispatch. Typically, those are larger commercial customers that participate in those. We also have offers which are sort of more intended for residential and small commercial facilities. So these can include direct load control offerings with thermostats. Some of you may actually participate in this at your homes. And we also offer a small battery offer as well, which essentially functions the same way, but it is via direct load control strategy, which essentially means that as a customer, you don't need to do anything. It happens automatically through partnerships we have with device manufacturers. Happy to go into that later if there are specific questions, but in the interest of time, we'll move on to talk about a couple of different additional pathways. Electric vehicles, this is not something that the program administrators directly incentivize, but because it is sort of adjacent to much of the work that we do and is something that we have heard folks are interested in, I did want to highlight that a number of electric distribution companies do offer incentives and rebates to support vehicle charging and sort of what is more broadly referred to as EVSEs or electric vehicle supply equipment. National Grid offers incentives, Eversource does as well, and Unitil, I'm not 100% sure whether they offer incentives in Massachusetts. I believe they do in New Hampshire, but there is a web page for each of those electric distribution companies where you can find more information on any and all incentives that may be offered for EVSE equipment. Hopefully that is helpful. Moving along, we have a slide on deep energy retrofits. I'm actually going to turn this over to Ryan.
Sure, thanks, Grayson. Just really quickly on deep energy retrofit. This is a program that we launched on November 1st. It's really simple. It's just the three highlights that we have here. We're targeting 40% greenhouse gas reductions, and if you're able to hit that mark, we'll offer you $1 per square foot incentive, and you have 3 years to complete. So a couple things to note, that 40% reduction in carbon emissions is compared to an existing baseline. We will provide significant technical assistance to ensure that we can identify measures that can help the customer get there. With respect to that $1 per square foot incentive, I just want to stress that that's in addition to our standard offerings. So any of the offerings that you heard today, or any of the offerings that you may go to Mass Save and see, that $1 per square foot is in addition to those incentives. And then that 3 years to completion is, so after we identified the measures and we've spoken to the customer about how you can achieve that 40% reduction, then the clock starts and you have 3 years to implement, but we will help provide a roadmap for success. So we will help prioritize which measures should be implemented when, and all of that to help the customer achieve the target. And last thing I note, there's a stress in this program on commissioning. So we want to ensure that any of the measures that we identify are implemented to the best of their ability, so that they actually achieve the energy savings that we estimate. And so there is a big focus on commissioning, even more than our programs are currently. So at the bottom of this page, we do have a link to the deep energy retrofit offer, and you're welcome to reach out to any of the program sponsors to hear more. Grayson?
Yeah, all right. So I think this is the last substantive slide. Again, this is something that program administrators don't directly work with, but again, there's a lot of interest on renewable energy and PV in particular. So we've included a link here to the Solar Massachusetts Renewable Target, or SMART program. It's essentially a declining block incentive program designed to incentivize PV systems at homes and businesses throughout the Commonwealth. It is run through electric distribution companies, but administered and run by Department of Energy Resources. And there's a link here where you can find a whole bunch more information about how the SMART program works, and how to get engaged if PV development is something that you're interested in at your facility. And with that, I think that concludes the content that we've had. We've obviously gone through a lot fairly quickly, and that was somewhat by design, because we'd like to now kind of open it up to your questions, and we will do our best to provide more information where we can. So thank you.
Thanks everyone. Miranda has queued up some of the questions that were in the chat, and Some of them had been addressed in the chat, but I think we're going to reread them anyway, just so everyone can hear what the question is and what the response was. So, and then also, I think you can raise your hand, right, Miranda? And if you want to just ask a question and not have to type it in, you certainly have that option as well. So we're gonna, does that sound okay? Start at the top of the chat and then just go through what we have already and then just keep rolling.
That sounds great.
Do you want to
Oh,
do that?
can everyone hear me?
Can now.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. So I saw Amias's hand up, and I was actually going to read a question that was dropped into the chat from Amias. Do we have to be granted the facilities fund grants to take on these incentives? No.
No.
You don't. It's just a resource that's available to anyone. So I'll move on to the next question. Richard asked whether CFF can be used for installing solar panel battery storage systems. Jay responded in the chat, but again, that's another yes. Let's see. Jonah asked, do you offer incentives for air to water heat pumps too? Amit would kindly responded in the chat. Yes, programs offer incentives for air to water heat pumps. And if anybody wants to elaborate on any of these questions, please feel free to jump in if you think that it warrants deeper explanation or conversation.
I don't
Otherwise-
know, I didn't read what Amit said in the chat, but for air to water equipment at presently, it's a custom incentive because it doesn't fit into the prescriptive offering. So you would work with your sponsor to establish what the savings and costs are, and we would tailor an incentive offer.
Thanks, Ryan. Great. Okay. Maura asked, are there incentives for someone to design what is needed? Again, Amit responded and said there are no incentives, but there are technical assistance funds to facilitate good design. Amit, do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. So there are no incentives. I think program administrators pay incentives based on savings. But to facilitate good design, we do engage at the start of the process through our bench of technical assistance vendors, and they will help in exploring or evaluating the various options that would lead to a good design.
And I'll also note that through the small business pathway, the energy assessment and turnkey vendor will provide that as part of the proposal. So if the opportunity to electrify, for example, or if there is a lighting project that's recommended as a possible option, that's not just a sort of vague statement of like you could do some lighting. That would potentially come with a proposal to do that lighting as well, or to install a new boiler or furnace or heat pump or what have you. So it is through the small business board pathway it is an actionable recommendation, not just a theoretical one.
So Miranda, can I take a question that was just asked because it does pertain to technical assistance? The
Absolutely.
question was, how does one become a technical assistance vendor? So these are open programs. So there are two ways. Every 3 years, program administrators have an RFP to select a bench of technical assistance vendors who are familiar with the requirements of the program, and program administrators verify their qualifications and negotiate prices on behalf of everyone for that. That's one pathway. The other pathway is, since these are open programs, if a customer has their engineering firm or vendor, we will work with them as well. We prefer to work through our bench of technical assistance vendors, but we will work with customers engineer or engineering vendor as well.
One additional thing, I mean, the technical assistance providers are sort of by definition not installers. So we don't, through the commercial programs, we do not essentially pay for business development. If you are speccing out a project, that is sort of an overhead cost that as a contractor, we assume that you will build into your proposal and your bid. So we have engineering firms that do provide technical assistance. Those are not necessarily going to be the firms, and sort of by design are not the firms that will then be installing that equipment.
Great. Okay, another question we have from Lori at Historic Northampton is their electric bills vary among the 3 historic homes on the property. 2 are residential accounts and 1 is commercial. Would our organization be eligible for any of these incentives, even for instance, the project would take place in a building with a residential account, and even though no one lives there?
So I can take a crack at that. Unless, Brianna, I don't know, you have most recently worked with the residential stuff. Would you like to cover that, or shall I?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to dive in. From the compacts perspective, we look at and understand that sometimes an account is noted as residential, although it is really a commercial account. So that is something that you might want to follow up with your utility to make sure that it is properly noted as the correct type of account. But you could serve it if it is truly a commercial property. We would look at it as an entire site and try to see the best way to fit our programs into it. Grayson, I don't know if you want to expand on it since this is.
Yeah, one thing I can add is just that, I mean, we are required to provide residential services to residential accounts and commercial services to commercial accounts. That is a regulatory requirement that we have that's imposed on the programs. And so we have a whole bunch of residentially focused offerings that are not the focus of this presentation, but which we could do at a future time, probably with a different slate of folks. But so the commercial buildings at your site could be served through the offerings that we've described here, and the residentially metered sites could be served through the residential programs.
Even if
Brianna's
they're not
point,
being used as a residence.
correct.
They
Yeah,
have a
and
commercial component to them.
correct.
And so oftentimes through our turnkey vendors, they also manage some residential accounts for the varying sponsors. So they know of the offerings that are available to that site as well. So it would be a blended effort, but definitely no reason to not pursue energy efficiency at all of the locations that you have.
Yeah, there are options available for you.
And it's all depends on what rate code you're paying. I think I saw a question come in the chat about a specific building, whether or not it would be residential or commercial. You would have to look at that bill and to see what rate they're paying.
Great. Thank you all. Okay. Another question. Could we define or elaborate on the term commissioning?
Sure. I think ensuring that the equipment controls or energy efficiency measure that's being implemented is implemented appropriately, working as intended and producing the energy savings. So we have an independent firm typically, or a contractor, which is not the design contractor or not the implementation contractor. We have a third-party independent contractor that goes in and ensures that on complex and or controls-based measures. Ryan, Grayson, would you like to add anything?
I'll just give an example. So for like partial electrification, where you may keep your existing, say, oil system for the coldest days of the year, one of the most important factors for how much savings that electrification measure is going to realize is when you switch over between the heat pump and that oil system. And so our savings or our estimates may assume that it's going to switch over at a certain point. The commissioning agent will ensure what point it actually switches over, so we know how much savings is actually realized.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if it's found that it's not switching over correctly, or there's some issues identified, then we would take corrective action as well.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'll just keep going down the chat, and if we've already addressed these questions or they've already been answered, just let me know and I'll keep moving along. But next we have, who provides the significant technical assistance? Is it via pre-approved list of engineers? Did we already get to that one?
We kind of did. We have a
Okay.
bench of about 24 or 25 in technical assistance vendors on the large commercial side, medium and large commercial side, and there is a bench of contracted vendors on the small business side, and they do significant technical assistance for us.
Okay, great. Another question here from Jane. Once you've had your walkthrough, you have to contact contractors, which may take many months to get them to come and look. How do the PAs follow up to make sure people really get a contractor to try to implement the work? And how do you track this?
So I think it depends upon the program. If you're asking about the small business turnkey offering, that vendor that comes out to do a site review and provide you with recommendations that you would choose to move forward with has a list of contractors that would implement the work for you. So we are aware of that, and it is tracked because we know what projects are open and closed. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, if it was about small business. If it is about, an application process, I'm sure the other sponsors have some information as well, but in general, that application process is being guided by you, the customer. So you would be working with that contractor to move the work forward, and upon receiving final completion after pre-approval or in pre-inspection work, and then a post-inspection is how we monitor to make sure that the work is happening. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Brianna. We had another question here from Bob. What should our first point of contact be? And I think you also responded to that question, dropping a link into the chat with a wealth of information on how to participate.
I did, and I gave, that's the general main landing page for masssave.com. I also then dropped the link for the small business offerings as well. We've recently updated our website, so hopefully either one of those links get you to the right spot to find more information out, depending upon which program you were interested in.
I've seen a couple questions pop up about sort of the size of a small business and what that means. One was recent. It says, is small business automatically a commercial account? And I can't find it right now, but there was something about the size. It was just about sort of how big. So the threshold, I think Brianna went over this, is 1.5 million kWh per year, or 40,000 therms of gas per year. That is ore. But those are kind of abstract values that may not mean a lot to people that don't sort of live and in the energy efficiency and energy consumption world. So for rough context, 1.5 million kilowatt hours is roughly what a medium to large size grocery store would use. So think about like a Stop and Shop or a Wegmans or a, you know, Shaw's or Star Market or what have you. That's a customer like that is going to use roughly 1.5 million kilowatt hours a year. I would wager that most of the cultural facilities that you folks are representing are probably going to be smaller than that. There may be some that are bigger, some like larger museums and things like that, maybe some larger theaters, but I'd wager that most are significantly under that. And so hopefully that's helpful in terms of putting some context on what might be an abstract number.
Also just want to emphasize or re-emphasize that it does depend on the rate code that you're paying in. So you could be an independent, it probably doesn't apply to this audience, but you could be an independent accountant working out of your house. If that house is paying a residential rate, you are eligible for the residential offerings, not the commercial offerings.
And I will also note just that we have encountered situations where customers are on what they believe is the wrong rate, and they have contacted their utility to change their rate. And that is certainly an option. That is not something that we can sort of impose on you. It is also not something that we can necessarily say, oh, we'll just ignore the rate that you're on. As I mentioned earlier, that is something which is imposed on us by the regulators in Massachusetts. And so if you want to be served through the commercial programs and you feel that you are erroneously on a residential rate, that is something that you can call your distribution company and probably get changed. Hopefully that's helpful.
Miranda, can we take the question that's right below this? Who pays the technical services for the technical services involved in evaluating existing conditions and proposing remediation solutions? So it depends on the program. For small business, as Grayson explained, the initial assessment typically is at no cost to the customer. But for medium and large customers, it typically is with a copay. Up to 50% of the cost program administrators pick up, and 50% remainder cost it is expected that the customer should pick up. Anything to add, Ryan?
No, I think you have it covered.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to continue reading the questions in the chat in the order that we received them. Are Mass Save consultants available to help us decide the best approaches?
Yes. That's what our technical assistance vendors do. They will help evaluate options and help select the best options. Typically, that happens for larger type projects where they will come in and do design charrettes at the start of it to make sure that the best approach is selected.
Okay. From Amias, our facility's HVAC system has corrosion. Boston Standard says we need to replace system as it can be leaking carbon monoxide. It says cartoon monoxide. I know that's not what you meant. Carbon monoxide. What are the incentives for HVAC systems?
So they vary, and I'm actually trying to pull it up right now. We can put that in the chat. There is a link.
I just dropped a link in the chat for the variety of heating and cooling incentives the sponsors offer.
Okay. Perfect.
Thanks,
And I
Brittany.
specifically put the one for boilers and furnaces. And you can see what the incentives are on offer there.
Okay, and apologies again if we already got to this. I know we're jumping around a bit in the order that the questions were received, but how does one become a technical assistance vendor? Did we already get that? We already got to that one.
We already got to that. Yeah, there is a
Thank
RFP
you.
every 3 years. Yes.
Okay. And how is it determined if you're a small business? I think Ryan answered that. We have a note here from Jonah. The incentive is as in the regular C&I program for heat pump water heaters. $1,000 for less than 80 gallons or $2,200 for over 80 gallons, meeting required efficiency levels per heater unit. E.g., if we installed three-piece,
It's per unit.
okay,
So if you installed 3 100-gallon heat pump water heaters, you would receive 3 incentives, 1 for each piece of equipment.
thanks, Grayson. Are replacing old windows under any program for saving energy?
When you mean any program, I can answer for residential. The residential sponsors have an offering new this year for single pane windows with no storms, upgrading to triple pane. There's a $75 incentive available for those windows that require pre-approval before the work is done. Specific to C&I. It's
Or-
not the same offering.
Yeah, for C&I, it would be a custom offering, so we'd have to evaluate the cost and the savings associated with it. I will say that typically Windows is pretty expensive, so it can be difficult to support, but we are always looking to find ways to support any. I would consider that a weatherization opportunity, so we would consider we would investigate any way to support it.
Okay, we have 2 questions that are kind of in the same vein. Is a historic building being renovated considered a residential or commercial account?
So I think to that point, it really depends upon how you're designated on your bill, your electric bill or your natural gas bill.
Okay,
And I think I saw a follow-up to that. I think it was to that one about if it was unoccupied for some time, so maybe it doesn't have an account right now. When you get an active account, it depends on what that active account is. But you will need an active account to access these programs.
okay, great, thank you. How sensitive are the auditors to the needs of historic buildings? Not all weatherization upgrades will make sense because they might unknowingly cause damage, like wall insulation. Is a question from Benjamin.
Yep, so absolutely. I'm kind of viewing this as more of a small business turnkey site, possibly where you have a historic building that has lath and plaster walls. The auditing teams are aware of the limitations that lath and plaster would cause to blow the wall in, and that it would cause damage. So yes, there are definite limitations for historic buildings, but we do try to make best use of air sealing opportunities where applicable. Same thing kind of goes for some sites that, you know, might have knob and tube. We would want to make sure that that was looked at, or it might cause limitations. So teams are aware of how to look at historic buildings.
Great. Are there grants that Eversource or National Grid offers to nonprofits?
So these offers are available to all commercial customers. You don't need to be a nonprofit to access them. That being said, there aren't additional incentives available to nonprofits.
Okay. Are there any programs that allow for rebates for projects that are already in progress or the installation has already begun?
I would say most of these require pre-approval. Even though the incentive is paid at the end of installation. So everyone is encouraged to contact the program administrator before they start on installation of anything.
Thank you. Okay, who's next? Since we're all nonprofits, is it possible to apply a hybrid approach through Mass Save, meaning that the best incentives from both residential and commercial or small business and apply them?
So as Grayson has mentioned, and I've tried to emphasize, we are regulated. So it will depend on that actual site's rate code will determine what incentives will be eligible for a particular site. So we can't do a hybrid across the board hybrid approach.
Okay, last question I have here is, does incentive mean discount? I guess, can we talk a little bit about what you mean when you say incentive?
So,
Yeah, I mean, so, oh, go ahead, Ryan.
yeah, I'll try to explain it, and then you could try to chime in as well. So
Yeah.
we're using incentive, I think, on this call as sort of an umbrella term. That could be a rebate, could be an incentive, could be an instant discount. On the commercial side, a lot of our quote unquote incentives are in the form of a check after the project is implemented. So you pay for the project, and then we give you or your vendor or contractor a check in some amount to offset some of those costs. We also do offer incentives at the point of sale, so those would be instant discounts. And then there are other rebates that are truly rebates where you install it and then you send us some information and then we send you a check after the fact.
Great. Will heat pump water heater supply 349 gallons per hour at 100 degrees Fahrenheit?
That is an awfully detailed question, and I think you would need to either talk to a HVAC professional or perhaps look at the data sheet for that particular piece of equipment. But I don't think we have the ability to answer that question on this call.
Okay. Well, that wraps up all of the questions in the chat. So I think we're nearing the end here. And I'll pass it over to Jay unless anybody else chimes in with any other feedback or questions.
Okay, this has been very helpful. Thank you. We'll have a recording of this webinar up on YouTube within the next couple days so that you can access the information. I think if it's okay with the program administrators, we could send around the PowerPoint presentation as well, make that available as a resource. Ahmet, you have your hand
Yeah,
raised?
I'm looking at the question.
You're on mute.
One of the questions, oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Your speakers now.
Okay.
Yes.
One of the question is, how do we identify a technical assistance vendor? And what we can do is we can send you the list of technical assistance vendors that we have in Massachusetts. I think Grayson can send it on behalf of National Grid, and either me or Ryan can send it on behalf of Eversource. So you can have it and attach it to the deck if you want.
Ahmet, these are the pre-approved technical assistance consultants and not the contractors, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and you, since we, I think, have the master list of everyone on the call, we can broker that information for you. I think that is a key component of this, getting the right people into the facility who have the expertise to make recommendations in a field that's evolving as well. Are there any other final thoughts or comments that come to mind?
Sure, I think there was one more question. I think would like a direct contact with you to talk through the non-listed process, and I will send I'll put my email in here.
Great. And once again, the Cultural Facilities Fund application is live. I think Miranda dropped the link in the chat, and we encourage, this is available to 501c3s primarily concerned with the arts, humanities, and interpretive sciences that either own or lease their facility. Municipalities can apply, as can colleges and universities with other criteria to be eligible that I won't go into right now. But we do encourage everyone to use the Cultural Facilities Fund as a resource to explore and implement any electrification, any weatherization, efficiency, or like has been brought up, the funding and for renewable systems, including batteries. The Cultural Facilities Fund is basically anything that's kind of fixed and integrated into the site or the facility. And most of everything we're talking about is structural, mechanical, and part of the building. So with that said, I think this has been very helpful. Grayson from National Grid, Ryan from Eversource, Brianna from Cape Light Compact, and Ahmet from Eversource. I want to thank you for taking the time to unpack some of this for us. It's confusing sometimes, but this has shed some light on pathways forward. I would also love to thank Melissa and Tara for their great ASL interpretation and the captioning services as well. It's very much appreciated. And in-house is Charles Baldwin, who is our accessibility coordinator, and he does a wonderful job educating us about all the ways that we can make the information accessible to everybody. And with that, I would like to thank my colleague Miranda Cook as well. And any final thoughts? If not, we can sign off.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
This is Charles. Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Rebecca. And thank you, Melissa, very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You're very welcome. Goodbye.